AV.
Hello and welcome to the 2021 ear webinar. Let me turn on my webcam here. And my name is Chris Bria. Some may remember me from previous ear webinars for this decade, and for the past couple of years I've been flying solo. But this year we have a whole new cast of characters and we rebooted the whole show, and you're gonna have a great time. So to start off, I'd like to introduce some of our assistants and presenters here. We have Ray, Julia, and Alexis helping with the inbox and the questions. We have Danielle Osborne for edible food, Cameron Zargarf to help out with some RDRS, and in general, we will have Kara and Ashley available to help answer questions. So on the screen right now, you can see some of the instructions for the Q&A session we're going to have as we go through. Please either put a question into the question pane and someone will try to answer it through there. Or if you'd like to answer your question verbally, you will be turned on and pointed out to start asking your question, and we'll do your best to answer it. So first off, I would like to go into, here we go, some basic information that you will need to do the ear. First off, everyone on the outside who needs access to the database needs to both be a contact for us as well as have a WebPass account created. If you already are a contact and you can't get in, please contact logic at CalRecycle.ca.gov or fill out the contact change request form and we'll be able to add you through that. When you are added as a contact, if you do not have a WebPass already, it will send you an invitation to create one. If you already have a WebPass, it will let you know that access has been granted to Logic using your existing WebPass. The web page that is currently on the screen is an older version of, if for some of you who have been to our website before have noticed various pages as well as the whole site has been going through a large upgrade, and pages related to the annual report, WebPass, and some other things will be getting an update in the next couple weeks, but the basic information remains the same. You need to be a contact in the system and have a WebPass to be able to log in. For those of you who are listed contacts for the annual report, in 2 weeks you'll receive a message, or not 2 weeks, about a little less than 2 weeks, on June 15th, you'll receive a message that will have links to log in and other information and a basic overview of some of the things that are different this year. But if you ever need to log in, you can go to calrecycle.ca.gov/LGCentral/mylogic. And from here, there's a Logic system sign-in, and you can press that. For the purposes of this webinar and training, we will be using our staging system. And so you'll see that when we're in this version of it, it's all going to have a yellow band across the top. And I just want to emphasize what we're showing is not final data. None of this is real. It's all going to be wiped out after we're done with the webinar. So anything that's being entered in here, as well as some of the information you'll see on the screens, is not final, and don't take it as such, please. So first up, after you log in, you'll be prompted for a password, and then after you log in, it will take you to the county and jurisdiction affiliation screen, on which you will see any jurisdictions that you have viewing or editing rights for the year on the left side. As you can see, for testing purposes, my account has a number of different jurisdictions assigned, but for the demonstration today, we're going to be using Los Angeles unincorporated. And once again, this is not final data. Nothing you're going to see is actually happening in that, and it's all just test stuff. On this launch screen here, You'll be able to see some old information for the old EDRS system, that tract disposal. Please note the disclaimer here that all disposal reporting is now done in the Rdrs, the recycling and disposal reporting system, and is separate from Logic, and that data is ported over to help fill out the information in the disposal calculator in the year when we get to that point. A couple other nifty things on this page is that you can get access to previous year's year summaries, going all the way back to 2000 if they exist that far. And you can also see venue and event summary reports, as well as a link to the previous year's diversion program notes. And from here, you can download any note for any program for any year going back as far as you want. And if it's taking a little bit too long, we might skip that, but basically it'll open up this screen. It'll show all the notes with a couple filters, and you can export it to Excel if you want to. Check my little thing. Did all the stuff. Okay, so with that, that is the basic introduction info. Oh, there's the notes screen. So yeah, these are all the diversion program notes. You can show all, you can export to Excel, and you can filter them for anything you want. So with that, I would like to move on and introduce our first new guest star for this year, Andrew Parrish, who has been working extensively on this sort of ear rebuild, as it were, and he's going to be able to walk you through each of the new sections and what you'll be doing each of them. So Andrew, please take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Can you pass me over presenter, please?
Sure. Where'd you go, Andrew? Make presenter. All right, there you go.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'm gonna turn my webcam off so the screen's a little bit bigger here. Okay, I just wanted to go over kind of a little bit more, Chris already touched on it, but a little disclaimer here on the PowerPoint. So we're kind of calling this the beta version. So what we're presenting is the beta version. We still have some tweaks that we're actively working on to kind of reorder stuff, some typo changes, title changes, and additional tooltips. So what you see today is not final. However, what is final is kind of the structure, how it works, how you fill it out. But I just kind of wanted to note that in the beginning. So if you look at this recording, once we do post it and once we process it and have everything ADA compliant, we'll send out a listserv message of where you can find this webinar and all these future restructured ear webinars on our website. And then if you have any questions, you can always contact your LAM representative and they'll be able to help you find these things. Okay. Now I'm going to switch over to Okay. Is my report showing up on the screen just to make sure, or the ear?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so before we get into kind of the function of the report for this upcoming ear cycle, the information that's going to be due in the electronic annual report by October 1st, 2022, you may submit earlier if you choose, will be AB 939. So that'll be your source reduction recycling element and household hazardous waste diversion programs, report on the 2021 status of those. For MCR and more, report on the most current data through June of 2022. And for SB 1383, or how we kind of refer to it in the ear, SLCP, in those sections, report on implementation from January 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2022. And I'll note it several times throughout the kind of the walkthrough here, but if there's no data to report, since we're only kind of doing that, and this is specific kind of to the SLCP 1383 portions, there's still required fields. So you'll just either enter kind of a 0 or not applicable. And there's also additional description box that you can kind of describe when things are going to be implemented, since 2022 is not quite over and there could still be some time to further implement SLCP programs. Okay, so in general, what you're looking at is kind of that summary home screen. And we'll see if my little tool works. Is there a little red box showing up on your screen just so I know whether I can use it or not?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so what you'll see here, we kind of have the ear reorganized into different sections. And so we're kind of shifting over, and we've tried as much as possible to consolidate and eliminate any duplicative reporting between AB 939, MCR, MORE, and SLCP. So we kind of organize more by program and sector and material. And so this is kind of the new structure, and I'll just kind of click through these sections, and we're going to take lots of breaks. We're going to go through a few sections, we'll take breaks and answer questions and then keep moving. And we should have some time at the end to answer additional questions. And so for this particular one, we're kind of previewing kind of the single entity submittal of an EAR. Tomorrow, we're going to be covering what regional agency reports will look like. And then next week on June 8th, we'll be doing a webinar, which is all kind of the same general structure and same general function, but a slightly different focus. So next week on the 8th, we'll have special collection districts provide solid waste collection services electronic annual report. And then we're going to again do kind of this single entity city and county focus on June 9th, if you want to tune into those as well. So the general layout of how all these pages work, and it's all the same build, and I've gone through and pre-populated some of it so you don't have to watch all the clicks as I go through things here, but you'll have these buttons up at the top that allow access to edit all the information on the page. So you'll click edit. And again, this particular page is going to be reordered a little bit, but the information will remain the same. So this first box, or first grid, we like to call them, is just kind of summing up the information in these grids down below. You can't see both of them, but this one and then one below, so that you can't interact with this top box. It's just summing up information that you enter into these grids below. So you'll go through and you can check boxes of all the recovered organic waste products that may apply. Again, slight title change we'll have there. All these little question marks are kind of tooltips that provide more information if you need more information. And then as you get into kind of the grid feature, right? And by grid, it's table, right? We've kind of just been referring to it as grid. So you click edit on the main page, and then you have to click edit again in each one of these grids next to the jurisdiction name to access the functions of that grid. And it opens up what we like to call as kind of the form screen. So you'll see this is kind of the form screen. You'll see this rural exemption. I'm going to address that in a few slides when all of the potential exemptions or waivers or high performance systems may apply, Article 17. So I'll address these checkboxes a little bit later. But generally how it works, anything with the red asterisk is a required field. So all of these little red asterisks here. And you'll notice that like the additional description field does not have one. So this is an optional box where you can provide additional information. We built this into all the grids. So if a number entry doesn't quite describe your program how you want it to, you can provide any additional information in this box here. So the way it works, I kind of pre-populate it here. You'll see a couple 0 entries because it's still a required field. If you try to do it without a blank and click save, it's going to kick an error message to you. So if you didn't, in this particular example, procure any of these materials, you just enter a 0 into that grid. And then you'll click save. And then you'll kind of move on to the next grid, which would be the adjustment recovered organic waste product. This one I didn't pre-populate because I want to talk about it a little bit. There's several areas where you're initially kind of asked a question, which is a required field. So if you wanted to submit for the adjusted recovered organic waste product kind of target, you click yes. And then I guess before I click, you'll notice these fields here are grayed out. And as I click yes, it activates them. And then you'll be required to put these entries in here if you click yes, and then you click save. And then if you wanted to say no, kind of graze those boxes out again, and you do not have to put an entry. I'm going to do yes just so you can see where these numbers influence here. So can't quite fit it all. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Can't quite fit it all on the same screen, but generally these numbers here and then these numbers up here all get summed up into this grid up here, and it'll be a little bit easier to see on the actual release. We're going to reorganize this so that it's a little bit better, but it's doing the math of that our procurement section has identified in the regulations for all of these different material types. And then kind of the last main feature is the SHRI programs, so your 939 programs. So instead of them, if for those that have reported in the past, we had kind of one grid, or I'm sorry, yeah, one grid kind of at the end where you have all your SHRI programs. We've moved all the SHRI programs into their appropriate section. So in this particular one, only procurement populates because we're in the procurement section. And the way these function is you check the box, which kind of activates the program and creates a hyperlink. And this is, and it'll prompt you if you get, well, actually, before I do that, let me save here, so I don't have to come back and do this again. So we come back down, it activates this hyperlink, and this will take you to the program details page that I think a lot of you are familiar with. So if you need to update any of your existing program information, you can do so up here. One thing I did, most of this I don't think changes for most of you, but if it does, this is where you can do so by clicking the edit button here. And one thing I just wanted to kind of highlight here, because a lot of times as a process, this notes field is where you may need to enter something. And I'm going to show you a feature we built in here. So if all you need to do is kind of enter a note here, you can do it here if you want. Or you can just kind of do it in this box down here. So if you click edit and kind of come down this section, it's white instead of that gray. So this notes field box is the same notes box if you need to enter any data. So you don't have to click on these program details unless there's something you really need to update. If you just want to put a note, you can just put it here. And then we'll also have an additional kind of note here saying that if your program is described kind of up in these grids above, there's no need to put any additional information. Kind of education outreach, I think that applies. And then you click save, and you'll get kind of that same old green check mark to tell you that the section is done. And then you can move on to the next section, which in this case is edible food. And you can click up here or here to move through. And I think we're going to just pause for a minute here and see if there's any questions.
Hi, Andrew, this is Julia. So far, the only questions we've had come in is regarding when the ear will be open. And Ashley wanted to note that we're hoping to have it open in the next few weeks, and we'll send out a listserv message. The other question that has come in so far is when the ear is due. And Kara said that for this year, the ear for all programs is due on October 1st. So we have another couple questions coming in, so I'll hand it over.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Correction, it's going to be due October 3rd because October 1st is a Saturday.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Good to know. So I'll hand it over to Ray, because we have another few questions coming in.
Thanks, Julia. Our first question regarding procurement comes from Emily Coven. Emily, we're going to go ahead and unmute you on our end if you'd like to repeat your question and state your affiliation.
Oh, hi. Yeah, this is Emily Coven from Recyclist. I just had a quick question about that procurement target number that's shown on the screen right now. I know that came out in a report from CalRecycle, but was wondering, will that be automatically populated when people go to enter this, or is there a way to enter that?
Yeah, no, thank you for actually asking that. Something I did overlook. So this procurement target is based on your population. And so that's pre-populated for each jurisdiction in the report. The only ones that change will be this one or this one based on your inputs in those grids below.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Our next question is from Ian Bevan. Ian's question is, can you provide the link that will enable us to poke around and get acquainted with the new system? I really would like to see how different this new system is from the model tool.
Yes, but kind of what I think Julia mentioned before, it's not quite open. We should be open in the next few weeks, and we'll send out a listserv message when it is open, and you can go in and see your individual report.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have Caitlin Lills, who asks, what is the difference between organic waste procurement and adjusted procurement?
Yeah, this one might be better for our procurement team to answer for you, but generally, this adjusted recovered procurement target is if you wanted to change what, instead of having a population-based procurement target, it would be based on your total, and I'll just scroll back down so I get it right, your total transportation fuel, electricity, and gas used for heating applications usage, whether organically derived or not from the previous calendar year. And then we'll note that we'll have our procurement team follow up with you on that to provide a little additional information.
And that's all the question I'm seeing right now, Andrew.
Thank you, Julia. All right, and we're gonna have several breaks as we go through because some of these grids are a little bit more complicated than others. So we'll pause frequently to ask questions and kind of break this up a little bit. But moving on to edible food, this one I left blank so you can kind of see the whole process, right? So I clicked edit on the page, click edit on the grid, and this one's pretty straightforward. So you can just kind of enter your numbers as they apply to your jurisdiction. And then again, right, additional descriptions not required as indicated by the asterisk. And we have tooltips kind of located throughout if you need additional information. They also, a lot of them pop up if you hover over the grid. They're the same ones that correspond to these question marks. Okay, so that's kind of it. I'm not getting the red check mark, and I think we'll have it in our system message, but this is a new build for us. So please be patient with us. If you notice anything that's not working for you, please contact us so we can fix that as soon as possible, as soon as the ear does open up. All right, I'll move on to collection systems. So collection system, this is probably the most complicated grid that we have in this entire report, and it's a little bit large. We're gonna have some additional tooltips that add some clarity for how this functions, but I wanted to spend a little time here to kind of walk you through how it will look. So edit on the top of the page again, edit in the grid. And then I think the first thing that kind of becomes obvious that maybe didn't saw in the other grids is that the save and cancel buttons, right, are not really where you would think they were. And something that this grid also has is this its own scroll bar down here. And that's really just due to the size of the grid and to limit how much input jurisdictions had to do. It made more sense for us to do it in one grid as opposed to breaking it into two, and you'll see why as you add haulers in just a moment. I just wanted to point these two things out. So, you know, right, I have kind of this scroll bar on my page, but then this grid itself has one. So if you kind of slide over, you'll find the save and cancel buttons. And that's really, these are centered in the grid, not necessarily underneath the questions that are up here. So the way this this functions, this might be a good time since most of our waivers are here too. So if a rural exemption, low population waiver, or kind of the high performance article 17 we haven't referred to here, the one that's not showing up in this particular grid would be the elevation waiver as well. But the way these function are, if you click the box, it kind of allows you to not answer the required field question. So rural exemption doesn't have to have collection in this particular example. So if I click the rural exemption and then click save, it allows me to bypass that entire grid and not enter any information. Whereas if I don't select it and try to pick save, And again, like this grid has its own scroll bar. It's telling me that I have to do these required entries. Just want to point that out. Low population waiver works the same way in this particular grid. And low population, I kind of wanted to note as well that, and we have it noted up here, and we're going to update this language a little bit. But essentially what it's saying is it's jurisdiction's responsibility ultimately to know what they are waived from reporting and what are required to be reported on. Our system was kind of unable to eliminate particular census tracts. So the low population waiver kind of bypasses those required fields, but if you still have census tracts that are required to collect, you need to report on those, even though you're selecting that low population waiver box. So we'll kind of come back in here and go through just kind of a normal non-exempt and non-waived area. So we split it into residential and commercial for convenience, just in case they are different collection systems. For example purposes, I'm just going to assume that they're both the same. So as you check the box, you'll kind of notice that these are white as opposed to these that are still gray. So it's asking for that number of generators for the collection system selected. So it requires an entry in both of those. And then again, that scroll bar at the bottom of the grid, and click save. And then you have recorded your entry in that box here. And some of these titles are going to shift a little bit to make it a little bit more clear of what we're asking. And this is where I've kind of pre-populated it, but I'll go in here and show you generally how they work. So on these questions in the beginning, you do have to select yes or no. On this top example, I selected yes. You only have to identify the facility that are allowing plastic bags or compulsive plastics in the green container. We built in a function that you can select the Rdrs number if you choose to identify the facility that way. It's not required for these particular reporting questions. And the way it works is you highlight them. We are going to include kind of a link to our Rdrs facility search page. So if you're not sure of the number, since that's how it's organized, you can click on the hyperlink. It'll be like right here. Once the report year releases, you can click on that and you can search it so you know the number. But you just hit select, it moves them over into that selected category. The second question I said no, just to kind of show you the difference of it having it grayed out and not requiring an entry, as well as the select and remove buttons also being grayed out. As you scroll back down, you click save on that field, and it updates that record. One thing I want to note is that in the organic waste haulers grid, it does require you to enter the Rdrs facility number. So we did not give have the text box option to identify it how you choose. You have to pick the Rdrs number out of this list here. I already kind of pre-populated it for example purposes. And you just come down to the bottom and click save. And as you see, I get my green check mark. And I'm done with this section. And I know this grid's kind of populated, so we're going to pause again and see if there's any other questions.
We do have some questions, Andrew. The first one being from Haley Knert, who asks, do you need to report tier 1 and 2 generators for this first report?
Edible food generators, is that what the question is?
Yes, tier 1 and tier 2.
Back over here.
Previous section, yes.
Danielle, can you mind answering that question for them?
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, I'm just double checking because you're right that tier 2 generators are required to donate starting in 2024. I do want to double check. I might have to follow up with this just because I want to make sure that I'm getting this correct.
Thank you, Danielle.
I could chime in too. This is Ashley. So in the regs for reporting for Article 10, it says the number of commercial edible food generators located within the jurisdiction Andrew, I don't think we separate tier 1 and tier 2, do we, in the report?
No.
So it would just be your total number that you have for, in this October report, a reminder, it's for January of this year to June 30th of this year for 1383 purposes. So there was another question that Kara and I responded to about 2021. So this again, and we tried to do it for efficiency purposes for everyone, instead of requiring 2 reports this year for the 2021 SRI, we, MCR more data, we combined it with the 1383 report that's due in October of this year, sorry. So that October report, which is this one that Andrew's going over, should have the 2021 data for SRI and WE, but also the data for 1383 from January till June 30th of this year. Then next year on August 1st, we will cover all of 2022. So you may, and as Kara noted in her note, you may have some zeros or some information that you don't have yet for the first 6 months of 2022. We will get it next year in 2023 about calendar year 2022. Very confusing. That is how the regs are written. So we're following the regs, but if you do need clarifying, please let us know.
Hey, Ash, I'll just add to that. When it comes to providing the number of commercial edible food generators, both tier 1 and tier 2, as a jurisdiction, you already should have that information. That information is necessary for your capacity planning numbers, which is due, the county has to submit that report August 1. So if for some reason you're still identifying those tier 2 commercial edible food generators, please be sure to add a note in the annual report and explain why you don't have that completed as of yet when you submit the annual report October 1. That potentially is going to impact your capacity planning as well. Also, if you have a specific scenario or situational question, please contact your LAMD liaison and we'll talk about your particular situation and then how to address that in your annual report data. Thanks, Ashley.
Our next question comes from Karen. Karen is just wondering if multifamily dwellings are included in commercial and not residential reporting.
Yeah, so that's kind of getting a little bit ahead. We can address it now. It's in enforcement and monitoring. I guess it's in that collection systems grid too. But as part of the 1383 regulation, multifamily with 5+ units is part of the commercial business definition. So to simplify in compliance reviews or the Slcp grid, MCR and more, the commercial businesses includes both kind of the traditional commercial businesses you're used to, as well as multifamily units with 5+ units. And I'll touch on that again when we get to enforcement and monitoring.
Thank you. If no further clarification is needed there, we'll go to Emily Coven's next question. So to clarify, if you have low population waivers for some but not all census tracts, should you check the low population waiver box and then enter data for the non-waive tracts, or do you not check the box? Emily couldn't tell if checking the box disabled the fields.
It doesn't disable them. So yes, check the box. It's kind of serving 2 purposes because our system's a little bit limited, unfortunately, so we couldn't customize it to kind of account for all potential scenarios. But yes, check the box. It still allows for entries in here, but it just doesn't require entries. So you would report on those census tracts that are not waived from collection.
All right, our next question is again from Emily Coven. Emily is asking what happens when you click the additional hauler button.
Oh, thank you. I totally forgot to go over that. Thank you so much for doing that. So we realized too that you're probably going to have more than one hauler. So for each hauler, and you can click this as many times as you want, but you click on the additional, add hauler. We put a hauler name, just more, you don't have to, it's not required to put the hauler name in here, but just for kind of more tracking purposes for you to make sure you're accounting for haulers, we just put a hauler name box here so you could type in however you want to identify them. So hauler 1 in this case. We'll just assume they have that same collection system with the very small jurisdiction. And then you come over and save hauler, and then it will populate as another row. And so you can do this as much as you want. Thank you for bringing that up. Hauler 2, and then if you had some customization where, you know, low pop applied to one jurisdiction, I guess it doesn't really apply in this particular case. But you can click these buttons as well if it happens to be a hauler in those census tracts, and then it bypasses and you don't have to enter those required fields. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Chincy Tan. Apologize if I mispronounced your name. Our residential organics go to different facilities than the commercial, and commercial generators are allowed to use compostable bags, but residential are not. Will you have an additional grid to separate the info for residential versus commercial generators?
Not in these grids down below. So, I mean, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like you would just be answering yes, that they're allowed in the green container for your jurisdiction, but no, it's not specific to residential or commercial collection. So you just kind of say yes and yes. You can identify it here, or select Rdrs facilities that they go to, and then click Save to update that record. So you just combine kind of both commercial and residential into that, if it applied or not.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next question comes from Wendy Bowie. Wendy's question is, can you make it clear which tabs relate to 2021 data versus which apply to Jan 1, 2022 through June 30th, 2022 data?
So the year, again, is kind of, instead of being organized by 939 MCR more and 1383, it's organized by sector and material type. So it's all combined. The SHRI programs, I think, are very obvious. Most of these grids, for the most part, are Slcp information, but the entire year is required to be completed. So it'll be clear as you go through that just everything's required, or if you have waivers or exemptions, it's not required. Is that enough clarity? You want me to go further? And I think you'll see it as we get a little bit further in the commercial and residential tabs and education and outreach of how that works a little bit better.
Thank you. Our final question for this segment is from Susan Contreras. Susan asks, for the 2021 report, the food recovered is from recovery organizations within your jurisdiction.
Yes, I believe it's those located in your jurisdiction, but I'll let Danielle speak on that.
Yeah, it's the total pounds of edible food recovered by food recovery organizations and services located in that jurisdiction, regardless of where the food was recovered from.
Thank you. And then we have one more question that just popped in from Wendy Bowie. For collection systems, should we report on what is current at the time of the report?
Yeah, the regulations specify to report on the collection system that is provided. If you hadn't quite collected, as an example, food waste or food soil paper, you can kind of use this additional notes field to say when that collection will begin. And you can do that on kind of a per hauler basis if that matters, if there's differences.
I think that covers it for now, Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, so the first kind of 3 sections here were really mostly focused on 1383 Slcp. As we move into the report a little bit, you'll start seeing a blend of all programs, 939 MCR, more, and 1383. And we try to capture that, right? So some of the sections, we found it better to put kind of the tooltips or clarity up top in just this bullet point format, as opposed to the question marks, which are on the specific material types. And I've kind of already gone through it, but again, you click edit on the page, There's not an entry required in each of these kind of subsections of material types collected. We just chopped it up a little bit so it wasn't one giant list to look at. But you just come through here and check all that apply, whether kind of what it says up here includes all your programs. So this is when we kind of start blending things together. So regardless of the container or the law that you're kind of reporting on, you just check all that apply in this list. And you just have to, it just requires at least one entry in one of these, but you click all that apply. Have a box down here, there's a few spots where we have something like that, or if you wanted to provide any additional information on material types, you can provide that detail here. And then as we get into the SRI programs, so for commercial, we've kind of split them all off and put them in this section. So as you go through and there's multiple SRI programs, you are required to check these boxes, and that's just kind of verifying these details up top here, just kind of verifying that those program details are still current. And if you need to, you can type in here. I just want to do this one more time so that you can see that you can do it kind of either way. Let me click save real quick, because then a lot of times before you move off a page like I'm about to do, there's save at the top or bottom of the page. So if we click save, no, it's requiring me. Oh, I know why it's doing that. But anyway, what I want to show you is I just entered this note here in this text box. And if I go to the program details of this page, you'll see that it shows up again right here. So if all you need to do is type something in that notes field, you do not need to go to the program details page, which is on the screen right now. You can just do that in the text box that's in the kind of the main ear. And then we also moved large venues over the section. So again, you have to check all of these check marks next to the SRI programs to verify that the program details are current. And those program details have been ported from what you previously reported in your ears. So if there's no updates, you don't need to go to the hyperlink. It's just available for you if you do. And then as we scroll down to the bottom, we have the large venues section, which I'm actually going to pass it back over to Chris to talk about this. Let me just make you presenter. All right, Chris, you should be able to drive.
Thank you. Let me clear up my screen and get back to the bottom here. Share screen one. Okay. So this is the venues and events section. For those of you who have done the EAR previously, this will look a little bit familiar. Not a lot has changed, just its placement down here as part of the commercial section rather than its own sort of tabbed page toward the end of the previous year. From here, if you press edit, you're gonna remember that. From here, you can either add a new venue and event, copy over an event from a previous year, or check a box that says you have no reportable events. For demonstration purposes, I'm just going to copy an event from a previous year, since that's very likely what many of you are already doing. Since we're in staging, it may take a second. It does have to load a bunch of old data and bring it up. There we go. All right. So from here, you can look at the previous year's annual report, and you can pick or choose any of the events, ideally all of them, to copy over to this year. For demonstration purposes, I'm only going to do one. Otherwise, you're going to have to watch me fill out info for all four to complete the section, and I don't think you want to have to do that. So now that I've copied the event over, it says it's incomplete because Each year, there's still just a little bit of information that needs to be put into this section. If nothing has changed with the type or the address or what it is, you don't have to do anything on this page unless they did not provide any information, in which case you could check this box. And on the practices page, you do have to come in and put the level of implementation of their plan. Hopefully at this point, it's been fully implemented, and you have to put in some disposal tons or diversion tons and diversion tons. If you don't have that level of specificity, just put 0, and that will check the boxes off. So you notice these fields each have asterisks, which means they are required. It carries over some information from previous years, but you do have to put in the implementation level and some kind of ton number. You also have the option of updating any of the material types that are generated or diverted, and or any associated local programs that correspond to the venue and event. So now that I've added this venue, notice that on this gray line down here, it no longer says incomplete at the bottom. So this section is now completed, and the whole commercial program section is now completed. So with that, I will turn it back over to Andrew, or we can go to questions.
We're going to go through residential, I think, before we pause for questions, since it's very similar.
All righty, cool. Okay, and you should be presenter again, Andrew. There you go. Ah, sorry, press the wrong button.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chris. And then we're going to do questions after residential and education outreach. We'll have another pause for questions. I was muted when I said that just a second ago. Okay, so commercial section is complete. Move on to residential. Residential is very similar to commercial. So the same kind of material collection. There's slight differences in the materials. For the most part, it's the same, mostly down here in the other category. And then the SRI programs. I'm just going to breeze through this since it's the same as commercial, just for sake of time. So again, check all the boxes to verify those program details are current. And then you're done with the residential with that kind of green check mark right here. All right, education outreach. So as much as possible, we really tried to combine things if there was overlap between 939, MCR, and more. And you'll see that here in the question itself. So for education outreach in this grid, what we're saying is that report on all education and outreach programs, whether it's Slcp, more, MCR, SRI, or your HHWE programs. As you come in here, so it kind of functions the same as before, and are the same as the SRI programs, but it combines them all into one. I'll show you where those SRI programs are if you need to update them individually. So regardless if it's MCR, more, SLCP, or AB 939, you check the appropriate box, print electronic. For this example, I just selected print electronic. The SLCP requirement is just reporting on the number of generators. So that's where you enter that information. And then you're also required as part of kind of 939 MCR more to describe kind of what your print. And so I just did some very simple examples down here in the box. And then you can click save. So I'm going to spend a minute here since we have all of our checkboxes here, because it's a little bit different how this section functions. So all these checkboxes are waiving you from 1383 requirements, not MCR, more, or 939 requirements. So if you check one of these boxes, you're still required to select your education and outreach that you're doing, but you don't have to put, oops, you don't have to put numbers, number of generators that are receiving the SLCP material. So if you check one of these boxes, it allows you to bypass that. I think the one difference might be on this high elevation waiver, because that only requires the food waste and food soil. So if I just select just high elevation and click save, it still requires me to enter that number. We just kind of put these in here just so you can track where your waivers apply, as well as our own staff. And I guess one thing I did forget to mention is that these checkboxes only show up if you've already been approved by the department for a waiver or exemption. So these checkboxes will not be present if one of these things does not apply to you. Okay. So we'll just run through that again and save that. And then commercial edible food generators, as per the regulations, the only one that applies is Article 17, the high performance. So you don't have to fill this out if you select Article 17. I'll just do this example, I guess, here. I guess you don't even have to check the box in this case, but it just allows me to save. As far as the SRE programs, and again, we'll have an additional bullet here that says what I'm about to say, but if you've already described your education and outreach above in the grids, you don't need to go in and specify what you did for electronic here or print here as part of your SRE programs. You can just put all of that information up in the grid over in this description box here. You do still have to go through and check these check boxes to verify that the program details are current. And then we put these boxes here, which are optional, to provide any additional clarification for 939 specifically if you want to put that here. And then you click save. And that section is done. All right, we're going to pause for questions on commercial, residential, and education and outreach.
Thank you, Andrew. Our first question comes from Jennifer Gilbert, asking, where do we report the de minimis and physical space waivers?
That'll be in the waivers exemptions. We'll get there in a moment.
All right, so we'll come back to that. Our next question is from Tammy. Tammy asks, does this include our transfer station or just bins? And Tammy, I'm going to unmute you to provide additional clarity to your question. You're unmuted from our end. If you're there, you can unmute yourself to further clarify your question. Okay, we'll come back to this question. So moving on, our next question then is from Mikael. For the materials collected, I see you include gray container, but would that only be for a one container system? I'm assuming you don't want to see what's accepted in the trash container.
Yeah, the material types collected are focusing on the materials diverted from disposal. So yes, to answer your question in that particular example.
Thank you. Jenna Falk asks, are we not required or requested to report tonnages for SRE programs any longer? Just update the details section.
Yeah, it was never required to report tonnage information as part of the program, but I believe we have left that there. What would be a good example of that? I believe it's still there if you want to.
And Andrew, I can update that a little bit. I think one of what you might be referring to as far as the diversion tons is the way the SRE programs used to work with the easy button. The way to get around having to update this whole screen was to use the easy button and just put in tons. So the way we've redone it is that it's going to default to 0 tons, just so this section can be completed, but you're still more than welcome to put the tons in if you choose. It's just sort of being de-emphasized due to all the other new fun 1383 items.
Thanks, Chris.
Our next question is from Allison Schill. Allison's question is, will there be any information requirements from the implementation record added to the final year, or will there be any additional field requirements for individual cities not shown here?
I feel like there's multiple parts to that question. So I'm going to start at the end. And if you're talking about kind of more regional agencies, we'll cover how regional agencies and members of those agencies what their ears will look like. So we'll address that tomorrow. So I'd tune into that to see that part. And then what the ear has is only the reporting requirements. And I'm not remembering the section. I believe it's 189942. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. So there is a little bit of difference between record keeping and reporting. So only reporting requirements are in the ear, not implementation record requirements. And did I answer all the questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and combine the next couple questions that we have from Corey Jones and Kanisha Pompey, since they are both along the same venue and event reporting vein. Corey asked, do jurisdictions need to report on community colleges or school activities for venues or events? Well, Kanisha asks for clarification on the attendee limit for events reported. For instance, if there is an event that usually has 100 attendees versus an event with 1,000, would the smaller event need to be reported?
Chris, you want to take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat it? I was trying to answer a chat question.
Sure. So both of these are regarding venue and event reporting. Corey's asking if community colleges or school activities need to be reported. And Kanisha is asking if attendee limits for events are reported. For example, if there is an event that usually has 100 attendees versus an event with 1,000 attendees, would the smaller event need to be reported?
Okay, so I guess I'll take the first one about schools and state agencies at the beginning. Andrew, since you have the screen up, can you press the show button under venue event information, please?
Summaries?
No, see where it says venue
right
event
there.
show. So that's got a definition of what is considered a large venue and event and what the expectation on reporting is. And so it's really just the top 10% of large events and venues based on the amount of solid waste generated. So I suppose in a small town, a state agency or a school could be within that realm. So in that sense, you could report on a state agency or school, but also them being public, it's less likely that they're going to meet some of the other criteria. Andrew, can you hit the show button on the one next to it now? Because a large venue is defined as a facility that averages 2,000 people per day of operation. The same thing with an event. So a venue, if it's open 7 days a week and it averages 4,000 people a day, that would qualify, unless, as we're looking at Los Angeles Unincorporated, Six Flags, Magic Mountain, pretty big place, pretty big venue, is a museum necessarily going to be in that top 10 given some of the other options in that county? Not necessarily. So between these two boxes, I hope that kind of covers what is the expectation on venues and events, but it's pretty liberal in the top 10%, not all venues. And these venues have to operate at 2,000 people per day and charge an admission price.
All right, thank you, Chris. Our next question is from Caitlin Lels. For commercial and residential, wouldn't you select all material types since it includes trash/landfill? Not sure why that info would be helpful.
Yeah, so the material sections are focusing on materials diverted. The reason that we kind of specify all the containers here is just to cover all the potential different types of collection systems, whether it be 3+, 3, 2, or 1. But the focus of what you're selecting will be the materials diverted, not the ones disposed.
Sadie Caldas asks, if we select the street programs box and do not fill in new notes, does it default to program details from 2020?
So the kind of the easy button functionality of the SHRE programs has been removed. What will copy over are the kind of the program details, and a lot of times anything you're need to enter here is captured in the grids above. So if you need to type anything in those program notes, you can do so here on the main page. You don't need to go into the program details.
Thank you. Our next question is from Emily Coven. Is it correct that in the top box, you check the print box, for example, if you did print outreach for any reg, so more MCR, SLCP, et cetera, but you report the number of generators that received just SLCP materials?
Correct.
Straightforward enough. Our next question comes from Paul Freund. Just to confirm, rural exempt jurisdictions do not have to report how many generators received education material, even though we are required to notify all generators?
That is correct. So one thing I think that might I'll go through the process here. We'll just start it over here. So education outreach is including 939, MCR, MORE, and SLCP. So even if you collect rural exemption, you're still going to be required to select the material type because of 939 education and outreach. So if I click that, right, it's still saying I need to select something. So if I select something, you'll still have to describe what you've selected, but you are correct that you don't have to, oh, sorry, my example, I still have to number in there. But if I leave this blank, it won't require me to enter that number. It'll let me save and bypass that. So you just want to select that rural exemption box. You still have to select the education outreach that you're doing, but yes, you are correct. You don't have to enter the number of SLCP generators that receive that information. But you'll notice kind of down in commercial edible food, the rural exemption is not an option because you do still have to notify the commercial edible food generators.
Great. So our last question is from Vegan. How do we determine the number of guests visiting a large venue? Do we ask the venue, or is there an estimated number?
I would say to contact the venues to get that detailed information.
Yeah, I agree. And also along with that, as I mentioned, it's going to kind of depend on the area you're in. Hopefully, you know, you might have an idea of which are going to kind of meet that criteria. You don't have to contact like every business for every, you know, every possible iteration of a venue. But yeah, your best bet would be to contact them directly.
Thank you both. We just had another question coming from Christine Williamson, who is asking, is there any guide to what constitutes SLCP outreach material versus our traditional contamination minimization outreach or other recycling outreach?
I mean, I think a lot of times, depending on your program, it's going to be very similar. As a question, it's just going to be mostly your information of what materials go in which bins and how to divert those materials. So you can type that into the describe education and outreach if you want to specify which material is for which law that it's satisfying. You can do that in the describe education outreach box.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions coming in, and I just want to note that for those of you who have asked questions about edible food reporting, we will either respond to you in writing during this webinar or follow up with you afterwards. So our next question is from Justin Sullivan. How are jurisdictions supposed to track the number of generators receiving electronic SLCP materials?
It's a good question. Generators is not really defined in SLCP, so it can be based on number of accounts for service, as well as population. I think even an additional detail that might be helpful to know is you can include clicks of a website or text messages sent as other examples.
Thank you. Andrew, that's all the questions we have right now.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to kind of the C&D and WELO, I do want to point out this particular section is, it's not going to look a lot different, but it's going to be reorganized a bit. The main change is going to be that it's only going to include in WELO, C&D, CalGreen, and other programs. The ordinances, we're going to move over into this enforceable mechanism section, which is also going to change its name. So I just want to note that this particular section will look different, even though it'll function the same. It'll just be reorganized slightly. So again, kind of coming in a section, you click edit on the page. A lot of times where program details in 939 were buried in the kind of those program detail pages, we pulled that out and put it up front in the ear just for convenience, so it's easier, so you don't have to go into those program details. So this was specifically associated with program code 4060. So it's just up front for you now. CalGreen, pretty straightforward. Go in and enter the number, click save. And WELO is the same. And so I'll talk about ordinances here, but just note that this will not be in this section. It's going to move over into the enforceable mechanisms and ordinances section. You come in here, select all the ordinances apply. If you need to get to, and a few of these tree programs, we just moved up with their applicable sections. So the 6020 program we thought made more sense under the ordinance sections instead of kind of lumping it down here with all the other programs that aren't necessarily ordinances. And again, you don't have to type anything here unless there's something else you want to describe. But you do have to check the checkbox on both the 6020 program and 4060 program, as well as the other SHRI programs. And all you're doing by checking that box is verifying that the program details are correct on the hyperlink if you want to look at them. And so this is kind of the catch-all for anything that didn't necessarily fit with commercial programs or residential programs or procurement, or we have a few more facilities in household hazardous waste as well, where we kind of chopped them up a little bit. And when you're done, you click save, and you're done with this program or this section. So moving on, household hazardous waste. Again, we're going to change this title, say household hazardous waste, not just hazardous waste. This is only 939 programs, so we just put all those here. Same idea, check the box that the program details are current. You can provide additional description if you want to, and the reason these are grayed out is because I did not select edit on the page. Put it on the page, I can type in these boxes. Click save, and then you move on. Oops, sorry about that. Did not mean to do that. Okay, I'm gonna pass it back over to Chris to talk about disposal rate calculation and calculation factors. All right, should have control, Chris.
All right, thank you. Share screen. Okay, this is the disposal rate calculation page. It's one of the few things that's not very different this year in the annual report. Generally, it is the same as it was starting last year when we moved from having the EDRS, the disposal reporting system, to start having the information come from the RDRS, the recycling and disposal reporting system. The basic functions of it are still the same. Once again, what you're seeing on the screen here is not final data. This is not the final population and employment or final disposal number. That disposal number will be changing as facilities report or adjust information in the RDRS system up through, this should be the data that COB, close of business on June 13th will be the data that loads into this. So we encourage jurisdictions to check the RDRS reports, see if there's anything that looks amiss in those, and get in contact with the facilities to possibly get that changed before June 15th if you can. The general layout of this is the same. When you press edit, if you need to adjust something, the basic data for disposal tons, transformation, engineered solid, municipal solid waste, green ADC, and exported ADC can't be changed. If you do have a dispute or an issue with your reported tonnage and you work it out with in Rdrs with the facility and it is updated, you can submit a disposal modification form. And let's say this number, it's like, this shouldn't be 914,000, this should be 900,000. And we've already got it fixed with Rdrs. This is where you would make that adjustment. The other items below, the disposal reduction credits, are specific items that are allowed to be removed from a disposal total. As you'll see, disaster waste in class 2 are no longer editable fields because those items are no longer reported by jurisdiction of origin in the Rdrs system. But medical waste, regional diversion facility residual waste, which is a specific definition of a regional diversion facility, a C&D waste for projects outside the jurisdiction's control, such as a Caltrans issue or some kind of federal project that they're disposing of the waste, and even though you have a C&D ordinance, you couldn't get them to do it, as well as out-of-state exported diverted tons and other disposal amounts, which is generally going to be for grape stakes and like quarantine green material that could be composted or diverted because they couldn't leave a quarantine area. So that would be for that last field there. As also the transformation number, you get up to a 10% or 10% of total generation credit. If you would like to not claim that credit, you would put in 0. And after you've made any other changes you would like to make on this, we're just going to say 10 tons of medical waste and press save. This section is now complete, but because changes were made to either the total and or the disposal reduction credit, that would require the submittal of a disposal modification form. And there's a link to that right up here. And this disposal modification form, we'll see if it opens. It might take a little while because it's a PDF. Has further directions and specific information about the disposal reduction credits. Let's see if it opens here. Here we go. And on this form, there's some basic information as far as who you are, what you do, what you're asking to be corrected. There's some other information regarding the Rdrs system and the type of disposal reduction claim or misreporting you are going to be claiming. And then each of these has an instruction on which section further down you would fill in depending on what type of adjustment you're going to be making. So I'm not going to dwell on this PDF too much, but I do want to point out that if you have questions or concerns about your disposal tonnage information with changes to the RDR or changes through the 901 RDRS regulations, it is incumbent on the jurisdictions to work that out with facilities. We are aware of a couple issues regarding host assign disposal, but generally those should be sorted out with the facilities prior to submittal of the year. If that's physically not possible, you can definitely submit the disposal modification form, but for the most part, any disposal modification, misallocation, or misreports, we would be expected to have fixed in the Rdrs system if they are true misallocation or misreports. Further, there is one new update, and since I already closed the PDF, I am not going to open that back up again, but I can get a link to it from here. A new item that was available later last year, but not at the time that we were doing the year, is the Rdrs online complaint form, which can be used by jurisdictions to submit a complaint against a facility if they're either not they're not cooperating, they're refusing to acknowledge a misreport, and you have some kind of proof or evidence. So rather, you can definitely still contact the Rdrs mailbox, but this form actually allows you to put in specific information about a facility, and you can attach other documentation explaining the issue that you're having. So that is the disposal rate calculator. I'm going to make a couple other adjustments here to trigger some things in the next section. So that is the disposal rate calculator page. It's pretty much functioning the same as it was last year. The only major difference is the RDRS complaint form rather than just going straight to the RDRS mailbox. The next page, calculation factors, is a little bit similar to the previous year's calculation factors page. You will notice that the disposal rate accuracy question, which used to be a completely different section of the year, is now added onto this page. And the rest of the calculation factors page, as you can see, is kind of the same as it has been the last few years. So one of the things I wanted to show was, since I changed the amount, the report your disposal amount tons, it says that I have an alternative disposal tonnage. Because I made changes to the credits, I have the second box checked. And then because there's green ADC in this jurisdiction, if there's green ADC material, then first question here, describe in the box below the jurisdiction's plans to divert green material being used as ADC. If there's any green material, in this case, 742.95 tons, this first question is a required answer. If the jurisdiction has green ADC and is over target, which is an adjustment I made on the calculator to trigger these fields, these next two questions also must be answered to complete this section. So question 1, only if green ADC, question 2 and 3, green ADC and being over target for the year, or not meeting the target for the year. So let's press save, and I missed a required field. Oh wait, I forgot to answer the first one here. No, there's no change, no extenuating circumstance. Cool, so now that section is complete. And Andrew, do we want to go to a Q&A on any of this, or do you want to move on to the next stuff?
We're going to move on because we're getting close up on time, and I think it'd be important to address these next few sections. As a reminder, we have not sent out a listserv message for it, but we are also holding, in addition to these 3 other restructured year webinars coming up on tomorrow, the 3rd, the 8th, and the 9th, on June 28th and July 7th, after the year is open and you've had a chance to kind of touch it and probably really dig in to have some more questions. We're going to have 2 kind of open Q&A webinar sessions where you can attend, come in, ask us our questions, and we'll just be available to walk you through any parts. So we're going to skip a couple of our Q&A sessions, but we'll have a couple more coming up in today's session.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will make you the presenter again.
All right, so we're going to move over to waivers and exemptions. So we kind of have it split between, I know someone was asking about this before, so these first 2 grids deal with SLCP, and then you can't quite see it, and I won't scroll down, but I will in a moment. We have the more exemptions. So again, because of the limitations of our systems, we still had to include all the parts because not necessarily SLCP takes over for all jurisdictions, so we still had to include more exemptions, but most of the time, I think as it comes to physical space and de minimis, you'll be reporting in the SLCP jurisdiction issues waivers, so down here. All right. So as you come into here, if you do have a rural exemption, low population waiver, you will need to come in and check these and enter the information number of generators that are waived from that collection service. The rest are if you have equipment failures, just put 0s for example purposes, click save, and then jurisdiction issued, is where you'd be entering the de minimis and the physical space. So this first jurisdiction issue waivers, and I think we have some title changes to hopefully make us a little more clear that it's for SLCP, will be entered in these first two grids. And then if there's any more exemptions that kind of SLCP did not capture in the case of maybe a low population jurisdiction with only certain census tracts waived, you'd come in here if there were any more exemptions to report in this field here. And then you'll notice that kind of our additional description box in this particular one does require an entry. So if there's nothing to report, you do still kind of have to enter a value. So just enter 0 and not applicable. Okay. I'm going to go one more section. We'll pause for questions, and the rest of this goes fairly quick.
We have I think we only have one question that relates to this section specifically, and it's from
Sure.
Wendy. Wendy asks, do you have an example of a jurisdiction requesting disposal credit for medical waste? They're confused on how a jurisdiction would have knowledge of medical waste disposal that shouldn't have been considered in the entire disposal.
If it's all right with you, Wendy, we'll follow up with you after this webinar just so we can get through the actual ear restructuring. Since it's a very particular question for a particular jurisdiction, it sounds like. We'll follow up with you after.
Yeah, I'll run a report and see if we have any recent examples of that.
Wendy went ahead and put it in the chat. So.
Cool. Okay, so contamination inspections complaints. I do want to spend a minute on this first grid. So you should contamination monitoring for prohibited container contaminants. I didn't fill it out so I can kind of walk through this process. So we've got it built so that you can select route reviews or waste evaluations, or both if you prefer. I don't know if you kind of noticed it on the screen, but if I have route reviews selected, this box is grayed out and then this one's grayed out. And we're going to change the wording here a little bit so it's a little bit more clear what we're asking. But I just want to kind of highlight that this is the only required field here, as well as kind of those notices. And then you'd be done with the route reviews. If you come back into it and went the other way and went to waste evaluations, you'll see that this box is grayed out. So you do not enter the route reviews conducted for prohibited container contaminants, as opposed to this is kind of the targeted route reviews you did based on the waste evaluations. But again, we're going to clean up this language to make that a little bit more clear. So if you select waste evaluations, you do describe it in this box here. I'm just going to do an entry just for sake of time, because it won't let me save it. And I can't spell as I talk at the same time. And then you enter that, and then you're still kind of red asterisks. You're still required to enter that information. Click Save. One other thing I wanted to point out is if you're in here, in your Article 17, you only have the option of waste evaluations. You can't select route reviews, because that's a requirement of Article 17. And then if you have rural exemption or low pop, you can still come in here and select things, but you're not required to. So it'll let you save just by checking that box. All right, inspections, same idea. You put all your numbers in here. If there was nothing to report, you still have to put a 0, or if there were no inspections, but there should be. You enter your numbers here. Additional description is optional if you want to say anything about the inspections you did, and select that. So Article 17 is here because they're not required to report on inspections. So you select that checkbox there for the high performance. Complaints, same idea. If there's no complaints received or investigated, enter 0s because it's still a required field. Click Save. All right, I'll pause here. Actually, no, I'll go one more because I think this will be where a lot of the questions come. All right, so this is kind of where the compliance reviews, and again, like we stated before, our definition of commercial businesses, and we put it here, right? It includes multifamily, with those multifamily complexes with 5+ units are part of the commercial businesses definition. So SLCP is this first grid, your 1383 compliance reviews. You edit the page, edit the form, enter your information as it applies, and click Save. So again, kind of coming back to the some of the limitations of our system. Back in February, when we first presented this, we were kind of combining organics and recycling. We had to split that apart just because of all the nuances of different situations that jurisdictions may have, in particular low population waivers and different census tracts. So if your mandatory commercial recycling program is kind of captured up in the SLCP, you're still required to put an entry in here, but they can be the same number. And you can just kind of state that in any of these additional description boxes that is captured in the grid above. And then again, like this is a required field, so I just put kind of an example language. Not applicable, I suppose, would be okay as well, but just something to signify that it's captured in the grid above. We did build in kind of that same functionality specific for AB 1826 if you have a rural exemption. You can click that box, and then you're not required to fill in this information. It'll allow you to save it and bypass it. MCR doesn't have any of that functionality because there's no waivers for MCR. So you enter that information here. The notices of violation, penalty orders, and enforcement actions resolved are all 1383 related, and you enter those per generators. There's some functionality with rural and low pop that allows you to bypass the entries on the generators. We still have to do the commercial part. So even if you select a rural and click save, oh, it's giving me the bypass. Never mind, something we'll have to look at later. Or maybe it's low pop. But anyway, so it allows you to bypass these sections as it applies to these. Okay, it's not working for me. Anyway, so you enter the number of violations, penalty orders, and enforcement actions resolved in all of these various grids for the different entity types listed. All right, now we'll pause and ask some questions on all those sections.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So right now we only have 2 questions that are not answered. The first one is from Emily Coven. Emily's question is, so if your jurisdiction has 100 generators that were issued both SLCP physical space waivers and AB 1826 physical space exemptions, you'd enter 100 only in the jurisdiction issued waivers grid, but not in the AB 1826 exemptions grid. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe in kind of this particular situation, the SLCP physical space waivers would take precedence over the more physical space exemptions. Kara, Ashley, do you have anything else you want to add on that?
No, unless Emily has a follow-up question.
All right, I think we'll move to Jennifer next. Jennifer's question is, what does in compliance review mean? If the jurisdiction is not under a CalRecycle compliance review, do we put anything here?
Yes, so the compliance review title is going away, so that should help alleviate that confusion. But yes, this will be the number of kind of generators. The desk audit, I think it's referred to in the regulations. Kara, did you want to add on to that?
Thanks. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's what we're referring to, Jennifer, is what's required in Article 14. So for example, the desk audits of commercial businesses over 2 cubic yards. So that's what we meant by this term compliance review. It's what you are doing to review compliance of the generators as you're required to do so in Article 14. Hope that helps answer the question.
Jennifer, there's no more further clarification you want to provide? We'll move on to the next question, but for now you are unmuted on our end.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Kara.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ian Bevan. Ian notes, in a past webinar, the model implementation tool would, we indicated that in the past webinar, the model implementation tool would model the system you came up with. How much would you say that this system you are presenting varies from the model implementation tool? If jurisdictions use the model implementation tool to design their info collection systems, will we need to dramatically retinker to match the data needed of this system you are presenting?
Well, that implementation, I mean, there's a little bit of difference between the implementation record as well as what is required to be reported. So that implementation record should contain everything that you need to report, but there are some slight differences. Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, maybe we should ask for clarification because I'm not sure if they're asking about the implementation record tool or the previous webinar, you know, where we did the show and tell of the model year.
Yeah.
And that mock-up. So maybe we can get clarification.
Ian, I've unmuted you, so you're self-muted. You can go ahead and unmute yourself to provide clarification.
Yeah, so it was the model implementation tool. It was presented in a webinar, I believe, in February. It was my understanding that that tool would essentially mimic the sections that would be presented in early June, which is this. I mean, we basically built for several cities the data collection systems based on that model implementation tool, and it was our understanding that each module would like pretty much be comparable or similar. So yeah, if that's not the case, we might have to completely redesign. So I was just that's why I want to kind of know the difference, but maybe we'll have to take this offline.
Yeah, so back in February, that tool, we were really just trying to give all jurisdictions as much heads up as possible that the EAR system was changing. And while that Excel spreadsheet is pretty close to what the EAR is structured like, we did have to make some slight changes based on kind of nuances between kind of different jurisdictional circumstances. So it is pretty close, but it's not exactly.
Okay.
So with that said, Andrew, I mean, I think if you'd like, Andrew would be more than willing to set up a meeting with you to just kind of quickly show if there's any major differences. I don't think you're going to find any major issues, but happy I'm happy to volunteer Andrew for that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we put a lot of development time into this, so if this is a dramatic difference, we have kind of a big problem. But thank you so much. I appreciate your help, and I'll definitely reach out to Andrew.
Great. So our next question is going back to Jennifer Gilbert. Do penalty orders mean fines? Since enforcement is not required until 2024, where, if anywhere, on the enforcement tab do we mention soft notices / reminders that are given to generators who are in violation of some part of SB 1383?
Yeah, so I mean, you are correct. You'd just be entering zeros in these sections if you're not issuing any penalty orders. And that just kind of comes down to what you have designed in your local ordinances as far as the actions you'll take for enforcement.
And Andrew, can you go back to the violation section? Because this is probably where, you know, if you've done education or issued something kind of pre-enforcement.
Yeah, and 189942 K5 is the kind of the reporting requirement or the regulatory text if you want to see more.
Yeah, and then Jennifer, if you have something that's even before the violations, right? It's more about education, right? Then you would could report that. You could make a note here. You could report that in your education section. So a lot of flexibility there on where you put the info. Did that help, Jennifer?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Kara. That's
great. Our next question, and it looks like it may be our last question for this section, is from Judy Gregory, who is asking, can you explain the difference between commercial inspections on the inspection tab versus commercial compliance review on the enforcement and monitoring tab?
Sure. So the inspections here will be for the entity types listed, whereas the other ones, the kind of those compliance reviews or desk audits, are based on the commercial businesses that have 2+ cubic yards of solid waste disposal.
So Andrew, just to put a fine point on this, and right here, we're talking about commercial edible food generators and food recovery organization services. Is that correct?
Yes, and then I guess there's the one column there at the end that does say number of commercial businesses. So this is included here because it's a reporting requirement in the regs, but kind of as you see, we have the if applicable there. And it goes into, if you go over the tooltip, it kind of gives you a little bit more information about what that exactly means and why it's there.
Yeah, and to that point, this is one aspect of where the regs kind of start intertwining. And we recognize that this is a reporting requirement, but as the way Article 14 is written, you only have to do a desk audit. But should you need to or want to do an inspection of a commercial business, this is included. But again, it's optional. That's why we wrote if applicable. And Andrew did a great job of adding into the tip there of what it means and how it relates. So hopefully that helped answer that question.
Yeah, I'll take it just one step further too, is if you go into the, well, I guess, never mind. It still has it as kind of that required asterisk field, but again, just you have to put 0 just to bypass the question if it does not apply to you.
Judy, if there isn't any further clarification, we can go ahead and move on. But if there is, you're unmuted on our end.
Great note. That's helpful. Thank you.
That was the last of them, Andrew.
All right, fantastic. So these last few sections are fairly quick, so I think we should have some time at the end here to answer, kind of go back and walk through any other parts of the year they want to. So the facilities, this is AB 939 specific, and it just kind of lists those SHRI programs here. Just check the box to ensure that those program details are still current, or click on the hyperlink if you need to update anything. So this one's going to change a little bit. So we're going to rename this section to Infrastructure and Barriers. And what this is addressing is AB 876 and AB 1826, specifically kind of the capacity planning components of those two laws. And what we did here, if you remember, I think it was in Program Code 3035, there's a lot of capacity planning questions in those program details. So that's been removed because SB 1383 capacity planning requirements capture those capacity planning details in much greater detail. So in this particular section, we're still required to ask you this question annually, but if you have nothing to report as an update based that you haven't already said in your 1383 capacity planning, you just say no and save, and you're done with this section. If there is something you want to say, you don't have to step through those required questions. We just put a text box here, and you can provide any additional kind of annual capacity planning updates you want to put here. And again, the language of this question in particular is going to change a lot, as well as the section, but the function will be the same. I'll just click no, save out of that. All right, so this section also will have a title change. It will be enforceable mechanisms and ordinances, because if you remember, the ordinances piece of this section will move into here. Just kind of made sense to keep the ordinance stuff together. Again, click edit on the page, edit in the grid. If there's no changes, you just say no, and you'll see it's grayed out, so there's nothing else to say here. If there are changes, you say yes. You can describe your changes here. You'll see this is technically below the grid, it's not in the grid. So if you want to upload a copy of the ordinance and then just point to the sections that changed, that's an option for you. We just kind of put that there for convenience. but if you say yes, you would describe those changes here. And that's kind of all that's required in those sections. And you can access this document management outside the grid. You do not have to click edit and then go document management. You can just click here. Takes you to your document management section. There's like 3 or 4 spots in the ear that have this document management button, and they're all pointing to the same spot. And I probably shouldn't have clicked on it because it takes a while to load, but we'll just wait for it so you can see it. But this is the same document management that's always been in the ear. We just added an option for it here. So you just kind of click add new document and you can upload your documents here. All right, contact changes. So a reporting requirement of 1383 kind of has these contact changes. So primary and official is what we shorten them down to because more of the official name is very long, but the tooltip here just tells you what that primary contact is. So this is primary contact for receiving communications if we have questions about things that are reported or anything SLCP related. If there's no change, you just say no and it grays those out. And this is the long one. So the official contact is the agent designated for the jurisdiction for the receipt of service of process from the department for the purposes of enforcement if different from the primary contact. Oftentimes this might be the city mayor or a county administrative officer, but someone on a high level, if we were taking enforcement actions, it would need to be notified those were occurring. And then you just click yes and enter those informations as needed here. For now, I'm just going to say no so that we can move on. Okay, Chris, you want to take it away on planning documents? Let me get back to giving you the power to do so.
Oh boy, my favorite part. Thank you. Okay, planning documents. Sharing, share screen. There we go. Okay, so planning documents. This, once again, is one of those few things that is not necessarily all that different than it has been for multiple years. But the big difference is that instead of each of these being their own section in the ear, we've now sort of lumped all these items together. So for those of you that have been doing answering the rural petition yes for the last few years, that is now in this section. You should know who you are. If you don't, there's a link to the web page that shows those. And these are specific rural petitions for a reduced per capita target, not any other kind of rural petition for 1826 commercial organics or for 1383 organics. This is a very specific type of rural. Next up, newly incorporated cities. Hopefully, if that was happening, we would already know. But if you know of something that's going on that's happened in the last year, feel free to put that info here. Most likely, you're going to write no. The planning documents assessment. The SHRI, WE, and NDFE. The SHRI is getting updated if you make any changes to your SHRI programs, as Andrew has already noted. If you put a note in any of those boxes where you check the box and then it will link you to the code itself for more info. Any note you put in there is technically updating the SHRI. So actually doing a full SHRI revision is generally not needed and also probably not advised just because it's a significant amount of work and all the approvals it has to go through, and they're 300-400 page documents. So we strongly advise that no one says yes to revising because you are updating it each year through the annual report. Same idea with the household hazardous waste element. If you update any of the things in the 9000 code for HHW programs, you're making an update to your ear. So the general idea of a revision is probably not needed. Next up, the NDFE, the non-disposal facility element. And this you could very likely possibly need to update something. So in this section, you could put yes and give us an idea of what it is in the box and the specific guidelines for NDFEs, and what you would need to do to update that document is listed right here at the website link that's noted. This process is much simpler than the SHRI or WE. And for this case, all you really have to do is update a document saying this is a new non-disposal facility that we will be utilizing in our city or county. Send it to us and we add it to your big file. Next up is the summary plan assessment. Not that. Sorry, I was trying to pull up my note on it and my screen's got a little shuffled around. There it is. Oh, sorry, the notes keep popping into the background. That's why I can't find them. Go away, go away. So the summary plan assessment, this is a specific one that's only for regional agencies or for counties. And it's really just if your summary plan needs to be updated, most likely it does not. So we'd expect that question to be no, but this is not a city specific question. Next up is areas of concern. This is from way back when in the late 80s or early 90s, whenever you're, or I guess in some cases the late 90s, early 2000s, whenever your actual planning documents were approved, if there was some specific item the board at the time noted that was an area of concern, you're free to note that here and remind us, though ideally that's probably been mentioned in the last 20 years worth of annual reports if there was. So most likely you'll say no to this. Same thing with the conditional approval. If there was a conditional approval on those documents, you can note that here. Most likely will be no. Then the siting element assessment, which is a different type of capacity planning. This is specific to landfill capacity, because even if you're diverting all this stuff, some things are still going to have to go in the trash. So in this section, that's where you would mention how much disposal capacity you are going to have for landfill disposal. And if you don't have 15 years of capacity, you need to describe your strategy for getting the 15 years. And if you have less than 15 years and you don't have a strategy, you may need to revise your siting element, in which case you would answer yes if you need to revise it, or no if you have more than 15 years of capacity and you don't need to change anything else. So just to complete this section, because I wasn't doing as I went along, I'm just going to mark everything as a no. That way the section will turn green and we'll have a completed annual report ready to go when we're done. Oh, what did I miss? 3 in planning docs, 2 in siting element. Oh. 2 in siting element. All right, there we go. That's completed. Okay, so Andrew, are we stopping for questions at this point? Or we're gonna move right along and come back to these.
We're gonna move right along. We just only have one more thing to show, and then we'll open it up at the rest of the time with questions.
All righty, well then I will make you presenter once again, and you can take it away.
All right, thanks, Chris. So kind of where Chris left off here, the last section before we get to submit confirmation is this additional information report management. This section is optional. So as soon, kind of when you're in this planning document section and you move to it, it's gonna make it green for you. And we kind of have this note here too, that if you need to make any changes, you do the same process before and click edit and go into it. This page probably looks familiar to a lot of you. We kind of changed the language to explain how the SRI program management works. If you do need to add any SRI programs, you click this button right here. There's help and instructions if you need help doing that. We have kind of the program codes and glossier information over here, all clickable links. You can get to your program details by going through these program codes. One thing I want to note too is this column here should be gone by the time that your release is, just to avoid confusion. So don't worry about that one over there. But you can get to the program details here if you so choose, and it's the same program details. I believe if you click the back button, it might take you back to that section. But we'll have additional functionality to either return you to this page here or the section in which that SHRE program lives. This is just kind of here if you want to access those program details at the end as opposed to section by section. I do want to note though that you still will need to check all those boxes in all the sections for the SHRE programs in order to complete the year. So in order to kind of get green check marks all the way through on this page, you'll still need to go section by section. You can't just go to additional information and go through this list here. And then as you're in here, I don't know if it's changed quite yet, but you'll see this language up here. We're going to remove that language because the next and previous buttons, which used to live here, are no longer there. So you can't move through the programs like you used to program to program. You just need to check those boxes if everything's current in the section that it applies. And then again, down at the bottom, additional information, if there's anything else you want to tell us, not required, and document management. Same document management that exists throughout the year, like the button I was just showing you on the ordinance and contact changes. And then once you're done, it's kind of hiding here, you go to submit confirmation and you submit your annual report. I'm not going to do so, but it should kick you an email telling you that we have received your completed report. If you don't, please let us know. And that is the end of the year, so we can open up the rest of the time to any remaining questions.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew. We do have a few questions here. Our first being from Lori Mara. Since we already provided ordinance updates in the April report, will that be pre-populated?
No, but this section is only for changes. So those ordinances that you submitted, if you've been notified that your April 1 report was complete, we don't need anything else from you. This is only if things change in those ordinances.
And I'll mention that we are in the process. We're still processing those April 1 reports. So far, we have renamed and uploaded over 1,000 documents to Logic for jurisdictions on those. So if they were submitted on April 1st, we have them, and any additional ordinances that were submitted after April 1st, you know, if the ordinance needed to be changed, we're still working up to those, but we have copies of stuff. So if it was sent to the SLCP mailbox in April or sometime after, or to the staff person who may have sent it there, we should have a copy. So there's no need to upload an additional one unless you have like a whole new thing that's different from, you know, by the time you turn this in October, if it's a whole new thing different from whatever's happened since April, May-ish.
Really quickly, we're not notifying folks if their April 1st report was complete. We're only notifying you guys if it was not submitted or there's missing information. So for the ordinance, something that I was looking for was not only did it address like commercial and residential collection services, but also edible food. So if that portion was missing out of the ordinance you submitted, you will be getting a notification from me or my team and enforcement, letting you know that there was just some missing information. So again, we're not sending out a thanks for submitting, everything is a-okay. It's only if something was missing or if you didn't submit your report yet.
Great, thank you. So our next question is from Kanisha. If you add 3 programs here, will it then populate in the commercial programs tab?
Yes, sort of. So if you come down into, we'll just kind of pick one, right? Oops, I picked residential. Same idea though. So if you edit here from that list and typed a note in this box, it's going to show up in the residential section in this particular example, but commercial, same rules apply. It'll show up in that notes box, but you're still going to need to go through the section and check that box next to the SHRE program to say that these program details are current and up to date.
And I'll add that it's, you know, what'll show up on commercial programs is a specific set of these programs. So if one of them is a commercial program that you didn't have before and you were to add it, you'd have to add some more info on those. But not every program is considered commercial. So depending on what you add, it won't necessarily show over there.
Thank you. Our next few questions are all regarding being able to review or print to PDF before submitting the report, and if jurisdictions will still be able to do that going forward with this report.
Yeah, kind of the same print preview functionality that existed in the previous year will be still available.
Thank you.
Yes, in prior years, there was a button on the submit confirmation page that would allow you to print that out. Since we're still making some little adjustments and tweaks to that, it's not available yet, but it will be before the year is released.
Thank you, Chris and Andrew. Our next question is from Sadie. What documents do we need to attach? Do we need to upload copies of all of our education and outreach materials?
No, there are no requirements to upload any documentation.
Perfect. The final question that we have for now is from Cynthia Hull. Do we need to remove a program? Let me start this again. If we need to remove a program, do you need an explanation if it was originally in the SRI?
Yes, you do. If you change a program status to dropped, it does require you to put in a reason it was dropped.
And then if I could go back to Sadie's question really quickly. So remember, this is just the reporting aspect of all of our programs at CalRecycle. For 1383, there are record keeping requirements. So for those outreach materials, they do need to be in your records and your record keeping aspect. My branch will be asking, once we start a compliance evaluation for that implementation record, and the jurisdiction has, I believe, 10 business days to give that to us. So that is something that we need to just delineate here, that this is reporting. There's also record keeping requirements.
Thank you, Ashley. So that's all the questions that Ray and I can see right now.
All right, well, perfect timing. We're at our time. I guess I'll just kind of leave it with, so tomorrow's webinar on the 3rd, we'll have a regional agency focus, but it will still be the same walkthrough if you want to see something again, as well as June 8th and June 9th. We'll be doing the walkthrough. June 9th specifically will be the exact same one that we did today. If you want to ask more questions or more things come to mind. And then June 28th and July 7th, after the year opens, we'll have those open Q&A sessions, which we'll send out on the SLCP listserv to let you know that availability to sign up here shortly, probably sometime next week. So you can come in and ask us questions after you get your hands on it.
And something I would like to add is that any counties or cities that are going to be reporting as a parent, as it were, for a solid waste or a special district that provides solid waste collection services. We do have a few of those. The regional agency webinar tomorrow may be benefit you because you will have kind of a similar setup in the grids, since you'll be reporting on more than one jurisdiction. And lastly, I would like to thank a few people, specifically our IT team, if they're listening, for Luna, Andrew, Dylan, Sunny, James, Laura, Elvis, and mostly our amazing programmer, Isaac, who has done a lot of work coding all this and making it all work functionally and dealing with our constant, like, well, what about this? Can you do this? Can you do that? He's been awesome, as well as some people in LAMD who have helped out, Diana, Ray, Michelle, Julia, Marshall, going way back to when we started scoping all this out like 1.5 years ago, as well as Danielle, Greg, and Alan, and Kara and Ashley for their continued guidance and getting all this together and writing tooltips and helping explain the policy. And mostly Andrew, because he has put in a tremendous amount of work on this over the past year. Generally, it was a lot I've been doing for the past 10 years, and I've been pulled into other 13A3 projects, and Andrew was able to pick this up and run with it and create this whole new system that you see. It's hard to describe how much work goes into making this massive kind of change. So I will pass it back off to Andrew if he wants to wrap up with anything else.
No, I think you did well, Chris. Thank you so much. But it's really been a team effort. We really couldn't have done it without everybody involved on the team, not just me. And we'll see some of you again tomorrow. Thank you so much for attending.